I joined the Mongols because that was available to me in Oregon. You know, my friends from the hardcore scene that joined the Outlaws, that's because that's who was there in their area. And the Sacramento guys from the hardcore scene, they joined the Angels, but we didn't pick a side because we hated each other. A lot of us joined for similar backgrounds. We had the same reason we wanted to join, and here we are out there killing each other.
Yep.
And what makes it worse is we're not killing each other for drug money or for profit. It's for ego.
This is Inside the Life with Giovanni and Dutch, produced by the Mob Museum. Giovanni, Rocco, and Dutch McAlpin are former police and federal task force operatives. They infiltrated drug cartels, outlaw motorcycle groups, and the mafia. Now, they share their stories, along with others who have gone inside the life.
On this episode of Inside the Life, we're going to interview Justin Mooch DeLoretto. Justin's going to talk about his experience inside the life with outlaw motorcycle clubs, the anti-racist skinhead clubs, a lot of violence and things he went through growing up, and his time inside those clubs. This is going to be a different perspective because we haven't yet had a guy represent an outlaw motorcycle organization that wasn't in law enforcement. So Mooch was an actual patch member. He was in leadership. He was indicted. He's had trouble with the law. He's had a true experience inside the life when it comes to motorcycle gangs. I'm really excited for Mooch to come on. I'm really excited for him to tell us his perspective from inside the life, inside the life of an outlaw motorcycle gang.
Yeah. So sit back. I hope you really enjoy this episode as much as I'm looking forward to enjoying it on Inside the Life with Giovanni and Dutch and Mooch.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in, bro.
Most of the time on Inside the Life, it's a story of organized crime and law enforcement. And a lot of times you talk about the way the person grew up because that influences kind of what they do and what direction they go. And I know you have a twin brother. What do you want to talk about that or not? You guys definitely probably grew up side by side.
Absolutely.
And I'm kind of familiar with your background, but I think the audience kind of likes to get a baseline of like the way you grew up and where you come from as we lead in the direction of where your life goes.
For sure. Yeah, I don't think it's the stereotypical gang story that people hear. You know, I came from a very loving Italian family. And I mean, you know, Sunday dinners, everybody's holidays, birthdays, very tight knit. And I lived with my grandparents a lot of times because my family wanted me and my twin brother to have like separate identities, so we went to different high schools. But we grew up playing all of the sports. You know, all my family are school teachers and sports coaches. So I mean, I had this good middle class life, loving life, and so it wasn't that whole shattered home thing. I would say the caveat to that is my biological father was in prison most of my life, and I would spend, you know, one day a month going up there and visit him in prison. And you know, now as an adult, I'm like, wow, that's not normal. But as a kid, that was my normal. You know,
Right. It's not normal to have a dad in prison, right?
Right.
But then you also have a twin brother, and you guys go to different schools, and you live in different houses.
Yep.
There's not a lot about that that's probably normal, really. You know
No,
what I mean?
not really. But was there like behavioral issues between you and your brother, the dynamics and the characteristics between you?
Yeah, we just fought all the time.
You fought with each other all the time?
Yeah, I mean, we lived together up until like 7th or 8th grade, and even though when I was staying with my grandparents, like we were back and forth all the time. I mean, it was our family so tight knit. It's like my cousin lives here. We're like, you know what I mean? We all bounced around within the family, and so it wasn't that crazy. I think it was high school when we finally went to different schools.
Okay. And then you kind of like drifted toward that whole music scene when you were younger. Were you a problem child more versus your brother? Where were you?
He got in like his first fist fight like 2nd grade, and I kind of fell into that more in high school, and then he kind of phased. Like we weren't both getting in trouble at the same time.
You reversed roles a little bit, yeah.
Sort
and then
of.
you kind of drifted towards the music scene. That's how you kind of went the direction you went in life.
Yeah.
And what'd that look like? What drove you that way? Because
So-
where were you living around that time?
Yeah. So I mean, I was going to junior high school at the time, the same one as my twin brother at the time. So still trying to figure out identity. Like I said, I grew up playing sports, so I was like this jock kid, and my buddies were all into skateboarding and punk rock. And I remember playing my friend's bass, and I was like, man, that's cool. I'd like to play the guitar. And my stepdad started teaching me how to play guitar. Before I even knew how to play it, I was in a band. You know, we're you know, going to the buddy's house and jamming, and played at the 7th grade like some high school or, you know, junior high thing where we went
Talent show
type thing. Yeah. So, you know, that started really getting serious for me. And then I started playing music quite a bit more.
Okay.
And so
that kind of drifted you that way.
Yeah. I was in a band through high school, and then I got pretty serious in a band after high school. So that was kind of my focus for a while.
Okay. And then what drifted, like, you know, your direction in life? You're going to school, you're graduating high school. no thoughts on college or anything like that? You kind of just went to the music scene?
You know, at first, because I was so into wrestling, that was my goal for sure.
Yeah.
And then, high school happened. I mean, I wrestled all 4 years still and lettered all 4 years, but I didn't take. That's my thing about, we were talking jiu-jitsu off air, and I was like, that's one of my things that I regret is I didn't take wrestling more seriously longer, you know?
Yeah.
Because by the time I got into high school, it was just, there's girls and other stuff going on. And so my focus shifted, and I started playing music. And so now when everyone's like, hey, what are you going to go to college for? I was like, I had no idea, man. I had no direction. I got, a felony charge when I was 16 and then another one at 18. So I was like, so much for being a school teacher,
you kind of lost your, right. You touched on something there. You were an athlete, and I grew up wrestling too. And wrestling's very demanding, right? It's a long, long season. You need to be training all the time. You also lean toward like metal and heavier music and stuff. And you and I were talking off air earlier about gang life or being in a club life. And not only even for us being in law enforcement, I think we all are about that far apart sometimes in that we like adrenaline. We like to wrestle. We like to fight. We like to mix it up. And at an athletic level, it's not a crime, right?
Right.
At a gang level, it's a different thing. And somewhere in there, you were talking about you're into music and you skipped the high school and all that. But at what time did you start to get into like the sharp skins or that first introduction to your gang life stuff?
Yeah, so I would spend the summers with my aunt. I think it was some respite for my mom, right? Me and my twin brother would go with my aunt. And she's kind of this old hippie lady. She was an art teacher and a track coach. But she'd wake us up to like the Madness and the Clash and the Ramones and like all these cool old punk bands. And so like really early on, I was like really getting into that type of music, And so, that was really our focus for a while. And so, I went to high school when I was wearing a Dead Kennedy shirt, like my freshman year, and the back said Nazi punks fuck off. And at the time, there was a lot of neo-Nazi skinheads at my high school.
Where were you in high school at?
South Salem, Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there was a lot of, the crew was called the Volksfront, and they were getting really big at the time. And I didn't know shit about that stuff, and so first day of school, these kids are calling me sharp and they're pushing me around. And, these guys are like 18, 19-year-old, and I'm wrestling at 112, 124 at the time, some little guy, And so I didn't know what it was. And, it was pre-internet, so I couldn't just Google it. So I remember going to the bookstore and like found out what sharp was and read all about this anti-racist skinhead movement. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. This resonates with me. I'm the same type of music. I'm already into it. I can dress clean cut.
Yeah.
Still get to fight, And so I just kind of jumped all in after that.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I'm familiar with the skinhead movement more from the racist side from our work. Sharp's the non-violent, the non-racist, well, I wouldn't say non-violent, but
it's very violent.
The non-racist skinheads. To tell you the truth, if you're walking down the street, I see rolled up pressed Levi's, I see suspenders, I see shaved heads, I see button-down shirts. You look just about as intimidating and as scary as the racist skinheads, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the culture started in Jamaica and then working class England. And so all the skinheads came from the same place. That's why they'll call it like traditional skinhead, right?
Okay.
And it was real similar to the punk rock movement. It was just fashion and music, a kids culture, youth culture. And then as it got popular in the 80s, they were in the media and all that, then different political organizations were reaching out and using these guys as security or whatever. And so they started getting into the National Front and all this different stuff in England. And so they came over here, then, it was all over the media. Remember Geraldo, all that stuff. And so skinhead wasn't necessarily a racist thing at all, but it was a big group that kind of got radicalized, so to speak.
Okay.
And so the traditional skinheads or the sharps, they just held true to the multicultural facet of the culture. And so, and then obviously their whole beef was these guys are giving us a bad name, right? Like here we are, exactly like you said, dressed the same way for the most part, probably a little better, but still dressed the same way. And then we're going to get accused of the same stuff they do. And so our goal back then was just to keep them out of our scene or keep them out of our city. And now as a social worker, it's funny because looking back, I was like, I was a social justice warrior, but it was really gang stuff, right?
Yeah.
But my main goal, people were like, hey, you can't change people's minds with violence. And I said, yeah, you know what, you're right. But I didn't want these people comfortable in my neighborhoods or going to my concerts or, hey, I want them to, sketch out about dressed like that before they walk out their front door. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but, that was just my mindset back then.
Reality of it.
And you made it a point to like check people, to make them, you made it known like you don't want to be lumped in with the racist skinheads.
Absolutely.
So what did you do to make it, to define yourselves as a different group?
Yeah, I think Portland, Oregon, which is where I kind of ended up growing up after high school, they had a really big anti-racist scene already. So it was in the media quite a bit. Right. So, a lot, if they were into the punk rock culture and stuff, people kind of knew, and it was also, it's still kind of an antisocial group. And so it's like, some of us just who cares what other people think too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Our biggest thing was like our scene, going to our concerts and making sure that the Nazis weren't there.
Did you fight with other skinhead groups or only Nazi skinhead groups? Did you fight against other people? Like,
Yeah. I mean, obviously, initially the goal was to fight against neo-Nazis, right?
Right.
But, you run out of them at some point, right? Or we talk, off air a lot about ego, and at the time in the early 80s or early 90s, late 80s, there was like 4 or 5 anti-racist crews in Portland. And, our crew ended up taking the best guys from each one and beat the rest of them up, said kick rocks. So we were just going to be the elite group. So then we were like, hey, we're the only one. So, yeah, we fought with a lot of our own, too.
Yeah. I think that's probably kind of common ground, don't you think, throughout most of your gang life, and no matter what kind of club you're in, right? There's always going to, I mean, even in the mafia and stuff too, there's going to be some internal fighting, some internal beat downs that have to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so yeah, growing up in that scene, it was violent. You get jumped in. If there was any sort of slight, you're getting backyard, you're getting beat up. And but what was really different for me in club life, and that's one of the things that really drew me to the Mongols, is that they said there's nothing two brothers can't sit down and talk about, and you weren't allowed to put hands on each other. I mean, it's not a shield, right? I can't go and disrespect your face and not expect to get punched, but you weren't allowed to discipline people with violence or bully. And for me, because I grew up the opposite, and I saw, the old adage, like two brothers, we could fight and have a beer after, but I saw the resentment people hold. Or, hey, man, me and you get in a fight, and maybe I thought you did something dirty, now you're calling for help. I'm going to be a little bit slower showing up. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or you want to vote to go your way. So I just saw a bigger picture of it eventually, and I was a lot more aligned with not fighting each other.
Yeah, because listen, I could speak to law enforcement as the same way. If they looked at you and they were jealous, even though it was a totally different dynamics, cops look at you and they are a little bit slow to respond if they don't like you. You know what I mean? It's funny you say that, because that mentality carried over to both sides of the law. Those guys were the same way, right? If they didn't like you, well, maybe I don't turn on my sirens right away. Maybe I don't go as fast to get you back. So there was a lot of that. So when you made that transition from the music scene, how did you make it, like, into the biker world?
So I was touring a lot in the punk band, and I was doing the anti-racist Skinhead gang. We were touring, and we were traveling the country. Like, about 4 years on the road traveling the country. So I was meeting people all over, connections I still have this day. It was really cool, actually. Think about being in your early 20s in a van with your best friends, just cruising around. It was pretty awesome.
Dropkick Murphys around a lot, right?
I went to some of their shows, and then we became friends and stuff. So a lot of those bands before they were very big, we were like touring and playing together. And looking back to it was kind of crazy. I always tell people, because nowadays everything's nav, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, man, how did we go across country? We go to AAA and get maps.
You got an atlas, right? You got a big map with pin lines on it.
If you got lost, you had to go find a payphone to call somebody. I can't believe I can't even go down the street without nav now. So I was doing that a lot, and there was at one point that, like, all the big, each city had like their own big gang, like anti-racist Skinhead gang, and I was really trying to get all the West Coast ones to align and like work together as far as like, who's having what concerts, what bands are coming through, and it was all going pretty well until we had this big falling out with a gang out of New York, and they were like a big name gang that everyone kind of wanted to be aligned with because they had the big bands and all that stuff, and so that kind of wrapped it up for me. I was like, well, it's about time to step out of this scene. And by then I was riding motorcycles already.
Hold on, before you get to there, were you riding a Vespa moped thing at any time?
Yeah. I'll show you some pictures.
Okay, because I mean, you just said you're going to transfer from the traditional skinhead movement where you're riding mopeds, Vespas, and now you're going to go to the big boy bikes, right?
Yeah,
that had to be a big transition
for sure. There was a tattoo artist that I worked for. I used to like hang out at the shop, and get tattooed and stuff. And we'd ride Vespas together because he was an old skinhead, but he was a biker now, and so he let me ride his Harley once. And for a minute, I sat on it. I was like, well, this is it. This is a big difference, And so me and my twin brother both got Harleys. Still, when we were skinheads, we were still riding Harleys for a little bit. And then we kind of had that transition, and I've just always been that guy. Like when I found out about Skinhead, I was like, okay, I want to be in the best group there is, the biggest there is. I mean, something to do with identity as a twin, I don't know, but I wanted to be belong to it. And so when I started riding, I was like, well, I want to be in a motorcycle club. And I didn't know anything about that world yet, so I was just hanging around, seeing what was what. And looking back is kind of funny because I was so naive to that stuff too. Like Portland had this. They have 4 clubs in Portland, and they've all been there since the 60s. But to me, man, might as well all been Hell's Angels. You know what I mean? Because I don't know the difference back then.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm coming from the anti-racist world, and the biker scene has swastikas and SS bolts and like predominantly white. And so it was kind of nerve-wracking.
Interesting,
yeah, for sure.
Had you ever crossed paths with any of the bike clubs as a skinhead?
You know what? We avoided them because, like, if we were going to go beat up the Nazis and then say the Gypsy Joker showed up, we were 20-year-old kids. We were like, whoa.
Not sure who team they're going to pick, right?
We don't want to be involved in that. Yeah.
Were they trying to recruit from you guys at all at the time?
What's funny is now, not that club specifically, but nationally. So now, yes. Like, but back then, not really. Like, I think Southern California stuff, a lot of skinheads went to Hell's Angels and stuff. And then, but it eventually started being the music scene patching over. And I think that's what was really helpful for me, because that's why I ended up knowing so many people.
Okay.
Because like there's an old crew called FSU out of Boston and New England area, and most of them became outlaws, and then and all the guys from Sacramento became angels, and so and then me and my brother came up, and then from then I'm bringing my friends with me, and then the younger FSU dudes over here I'm friends with, so I'm bringing them in. So it's like eventually it became a pretty big recruiting ground, so to speak.
So we'll talk about it, but that kind of goes to later on in your life, how you can navigate so many different clubs and dip your foot in so many different bodies of water, because you knew people from the scene, from the music scene before. So whether they went to the Outlaws, they went to the Mongols, they went to HA, you knew people in these different groups.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I always tell everyone, for me, life's always been about connections. I've never made a lot of money, but experience and connections, and hey, I got a guy for that. I know a guy over here. And I've been blessed with this ability to stay in touch with people and, reach out. And so, yeah, for sure. When that came up, now we down the road doing sit downs with the Outlaws, I'm like, oh, I know that guy. We were in this crew together. Or we went to that show together, or, those types of things. So that ended up going a long way for sure.
So before we get into that whole scene, we're going to take a break real quick, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. So welcome back, everybody. We're here with Justin Mooch DeLoretto. So we're going to make that jump from the music scene now into the Outsiders and how you transitioned into the Vagos MC. So cool. I guess we'll talk a little bit about the Outsiders. If you could just give us a little bit of light into that.
Something that's really missing and people don't understand if they haven't been inside the bike club life is the levels of them, right? And you're going to talk about your experience with the Outsiders and as you move up, but can you maybe talk about like
the structure,
the structure and the levels of like a support club versus a full diamond club?
For sure.
Because you knew nothing about that before you got
absolutely.
there, right?
Yeah.
So we'll go into like how you learned the structure, like, how'd you wind up going from the Outsiders to the Vagos?
Okay, yeah. Like, like I said at the time, I didn't know much. Every one of them was the top level to me, right?
Yeah.
I was just like, wow, it's crazy, you know? But, as I went on, I learned it just from being in it, right? And as I went on, I found like every state's a little different how this plays out. Oregon's an anomaly in the fact where they only had one major 1% club, which was Gypsy Jokers at the time. And the rest were just local clubs that had been there for a long time, and they kind of banded together. They kept the other clubs out. They did meetings like kind of like a coalition of clubs, COC type stuff. But then, there's California where there's hundreds of different clubs. And so, now that I know, there's the riding clubs and family clubs where, they go to bike nights and charities. And then, then you get into the outlaw clubs, so to speak, which is not necessarily that they're doing anything illegal, but they were at the time, they were outlaw from the American Motorcycle Association is where the name came from. And these guys are a little harder riding club. Their clubs, one of the top of their priority list when it comes to, their work, family, everything else. And there's a lot of these ones that don't wear the 1% or diamond, or depending on what area they claim, they might be bigger in their town or their region, but they're not a national club or a regional club. And then you get into the 1%er clubs, and the way I was trying to find what the 1%er club is that's the big club that's dominant in their region. Like that's the one that everybody has to answer to or ask questions or see if they want to start a club. They have to go through. So that was kind of the difference. The Outsiders were one of the main clubs in Portland and one of the oldest clubs in Oregon, but they were just in Oregon and Washington. So, they were a smaller club on the grand scheme.
Yeah. So for the audience, we all know what a 1% club is, the three of us sitting here, but what's your definition of a 1%er?
Yeah, so for me, back in the day, it came from, they weren't a part of the American Motorcycle Association, and it was, the main clubs, the Hells Angels, a lot of the main old school clubs kind of banded together, and they're wearing this 1%er diamond, and from what I gather from the history, it was more of like a brotherhood between clubs, like we were the top outlaw clubs at the time. Right. Nowadays, like I said, it's mainly whatever club's the big dominant club in the area. Like if they're doing like COC or the sit downs with the Confederation Club, what club's running it, who's in charge, those types of things. The club that people have to ask permission to start up new clubs.
Okay.
But so basically, a club who's not wearing a diamond, who doesn't have a 1%er patch, needs to check in or get permission from the dominant 1% diamond club in the region or the state or the city that has the control, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, every state's quite a bit different. Like in some states, they won't make you, but they'll say, hey, if you want to be in this club, you have to wear the support patch, right? Yeah. Busier cities, like I said, or states like California, whatever, man.
They're too busy, right? Like ride wherever you want, do whatever you want.
Or, they might ask you to be a part of this Confederation clubs and, sit in on the legal stuff and those types of things.
Now, is it true that there's also a little bit to it where the definition of the 1% of the population does not follow the rules and regs and the laws of the land? They're anti.
Yeah, I know that's a big law enforcement narrative, and I don't know if I really buy into it.
Yeah.
Because which we'll get into at some point. But when you join a motorcycle club, you've got so many more rules than anything. And then how serious do you take it, right? You're saying, okay, you don't pay taxes, you don't follow the speed limit, you don't follow the rules, right?
Yeah.
Like, I would say 1%ers, you're supposed to talk to law enforcement, you're supposed to handle your own business, we don't press charges. That stuff's true, but but the rest is kind of like, how far do you take it? And there's that old narrative. There's an old narrative back, when they say, oh, 1%er means they killed somebody or they had, and I was like,
not even.
How funny is that now when you see how many people are wearing 1%er diamonds? I'm like, oh yeah, there's that many unsolved murders out there, right? And they're advertising on their chest that they did it and got away with it, right?
Yeah. But wearing that 1% patch does put a lot of attention on you from the law enforcement perspective.
Absolutely.
Man, you're putting a target on your back. You're letting them know, like, and in that law, it might not mean that across the board, but in the law enforcement eyes, you got a bullseye on you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think from a public side and from law enforcement side, if you're wearing a diamond, a 1%er patch, you're saying I'm a gang member.
Yeah.
Right? And law enforcement has a definition of a gang. And I think we talked a little bit off air. Maybe your definition of a gang is a little different. You define gang as like brotherhood and backing each other up and living on each other's team, right?
Yeah, in motorcycle club world, we'd argue that we aren't a gang, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely understand why it could be termed that we are. But the big distinction is they weren't doing it. There's no monetary value, right? We're not doing this to control areas financially. We're not paying up. There's no organized crime aspect to it. And so to us, that was why motorcycle clubs aren't a gang. Like we're all brought together for our love of motorcycles. And the brotherhood gets built being on the road, riding motorcycles, but it's focused on the bikes, not the criminality or nothing else.
We have a segment at the museum here. It's broken out. It's called Organized Crime Today. And we kind of touch on that and define that here at the museum to show people, like to showcase this is what brings organized crime. This
Very
is what
cool.
defines it.
Yeah, I look forward to checking that out.
We're talking about outlaw motorcycle clubs. We're talking about the law enforcement perspective. And from your perspective as a member, we interviewed on Inside the Life, we interviewed a guy named Jay Dobbins, who infiltrated the Hells Angels, wrote a book called No Angel, and we got his perspective from the inside. So it's interesting to have your definition and your perspective as truly being a member. For
sure. And, every club's different, so I can only speak behalf of my experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, from my experience, there wasn't an organized crime. I wasn't paying up. And, I joined in 2007. And prior to that, when the Mongols had that big Black Rain raids in 2008, there were definitely dudes that were dealing drugs and stuff. And they still don't believe they were paying up, but there was more people doing it for sure. But in my era, that wasn't really a thing.
I'm not sure how this is going to get taken from me being prior law enforcement, and I have been inside of bike clubs. I was never a patch member of a club, but I did organized criminal activities within a club, and members of that club were indicted and are spending time in prison or have been in prison or jail. And I don't know, from my perspective, I didn't, and I want to know yours, but I did not see something necessarily organized where the club sanctioned we're all going to run or traffic this dope. Members did, much like any other part of society, though. You can have people within any member doing stuff wrong, too.
That would be my argument that, I've said before and off air and on other podcasts, is that there isn't that inherent criminality. The big thing is a lot of these guys want to ride their motorcycles 24/7. They want to ride wherever they can across the country. And the real reality is it costs a lot of money to be in a motorcycle club.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're paying dues, you're paying gas, you're staying in hotels. There's half the time you're taking days off work to go for rides. And so there's always going to be those guys that if something's offered to them, who knows what they're going to do to try and make some quick buck, But same thing from that Operation Black Rain. I don't know how much you've read about that, or I'm sure you know.
Talk about it. Go ahead.
I'm sure you know a good amount about that. But, I figured out who the Fed was right out the gate because I made it a point to not do illegal stuff in our area outside of, defending ourselves, maybe some recreational partying. I was like, but outside of that, I was like, no, what else did I want to get busted for,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy comes up to me and is asking me to do armed security for a drug deal. And I'm like, I don't even know you, man, but no.
Yeah.
And
Suspect right out of the
was he in the club at the time?
Yeah, so I met him when he was a hang around, and then so that's the only reason I think he approached me, because I'd met him once before. And of course I was just like, nah, man,
Yeah.
But looking back, going through that paperwork and stuff, it's almost, from my perspective, it was kind of a bummer because they weren't getting organized crime. They weren't coming in and busting these like straight up criminals. They were finding these kids that were out of work or low on money, and they're like, hey, can you go do this? Or hey, here's some untaxed cigarettes. Can you sell those? Or hey, can you stand here and watch my back while I do a drug deal? And these guys are A, need the money, and B, they're wrapped up with the idea of brotherhood. This guy's in the club and my brother needs my back. And so that's when I see that type of stuff, and again, just from my experience from that club, I feel like, that's more of what's going on in modern policing when it comes to that stuff, because you're not just it's not like the mob where you're infiltrating this organized crime and you see, wow, these guys are doing all this stuff. You're just finding some individuals that are doing stuff, and then they use the club name at the end of the day.
Yeah, and from the law, we talked about it on the previous episodes, and Dutch touched on it a lot. Like, even when we did our work, we weren't always cool on just going after somebody and trying to bait them, right? Like, hey, I got this gig, you want to do this armed security. Hey, I got this truck, you want to hit this truck. And, that's just kind of baiting them. Like, we were real careful on the cases that we took, because I'm not setting somebody up. I'm not trying to come in here and bait you to rob a truck that you wouldn't otherwise think about robbing.
For sure.
You know what I mean? So, and again, we had a hard time because the way we were born and raised, and we have a lot of similarities in the way we came up. Like, my uncles they were in groups, and I never saw one bit of violence other than fighting themselves, right? When they got drunk. And, one time I had a thing at one of my aunt's weddings. We had it in a low-income projects, and not a good, I wouldn't ever recommend that. You don't put patched in guys and then put liquor and grappa.
Oh, for sure.
And my one uncle turns around and literally grabs the cake and flicks it, and it just all hell broke out. They were violent amongst themselves. So yeah, and I saw the violence, but my uncles were loving guys. Well, exactly what you described, Mooch, is loving guys. They love bikes, the love of, getting a mechanic wrench, doing something on a bike, hanging around on the weekends, camping on the weekends. It wasn't all drugs and violence.
No, you got to remember, these are working class Americans that, have a hobby that turned into something outside of that.
So my point is, like, law enforcement is sometimes wrong. They look at it and they look at the 1% patch, but do your work, man. Do your job like we did. Find out, predicate these guys, do your homework, look at your intelligence, find out, is this guy really, is he really somebody that's going out there doing acts of violence, or am I just trying to set him up to do an act of violence?
And that's kind of been my argument when it comes to the law enforcement attention to motorcycle clubs, is part of it is we're so visible, right? They're wearing your patch. And so if you do this newspaper article, hey, we busted these guys, everyone knows who you're talking about. They're in our neighborhood. And so I know there's that piece to it too, right? It's not like, oh, the mob that doesn't exist. Like, these guys are wearing their patches. Right. And so I think it makes it somewhat of an easy target. And then, we do know people that were out doing criminal stuff, but like I said, as a whole, and nowadays, what do you see these clubs get busted for? Fighting each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, that's it's a different conversation, but that's still not organized crime. And like, when I was in leadership, I never wanted to walk into a bar and people go, oh, fuck, the Mongols are here. Right. I wanted to be welcome back. And so, man, we were some of the most, I liked when we left, people go, man, those guys were great. I wouldn't mess with them, but they were great. But, show respect and pay, tip. And we weren't in there bullying people or fighting at the bars. And man, that went such a long way. And some of these guys could be on your jury one day. Someone could be, might need help from one day. Right. But just that community piece. Yeah. And that's kind of that old school mentality, right? But same thing when you talk about the Hells Angels in New York, right? How they had the safest block there. Their clubhouse was, no one's dealing drugs around them, So, I mean, there's these other pieces to it too, where it's like, in fact, they're probably more anti-gang stuff than people think, because, they always think, what's gonna hurt or benefit the group as a whole, and then what's gonna hurt or affect our neighborhood or where we live. And so,
and it's funny to hear you say that, because I'm thinking my years early in law enforcement, I infiltrated bike groups. But that's the thing. When I walked in, I watched my uncles walk in. I watched my friends that are patched in. The bar gets tense, right? Everybody gets tensed up. The music kind of stops, and that, But then once people like, oh man, these guys are here, everybody's gonna get a fist fight, and then they're all teddy bears, and they kind of like let people know there's a message to it. It's almost like a public service announcement. They're expecting worse from you, but then when you start calling the lady behind the bar ma'am, and they're not there for fighting and just beating the shit out of people. There's civilization to it.
Absolutely,
without a doubt.
But don't pass a 1%er.
Right.
Don't cross the line.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me the wrong way. So, although you guys have good intentions, you're in a club, you don't commit crimes, there is that element, there is that attitude of tough guyness, and that can kind of be, if you think about the kind of people we worked with in the feds, right? And they grew up in really good neighborhoods and really good schools. For the most part, they haven't been around people that are like, don't cross me this way. And you can come across as kind of that gang mentality. And we were talking about, how does a motorcycle club get targeted, right? You're wearing a patch, you're identified easily. I've been asked and did, I suppose, infiltrate a couple of 1%er clubs, or at least individuals in that club. Those people had been predicated. They were already committing crimes. I know the tactic that you're talking about, where, hey, I've got a truckload of drugs, and you help me protect it, and they indict everybody as a whole. Yeah. And I consider that to be entrapment. You know what I mean? But also, when you talked about being a leader, I think if you're going to be a good leader, you have to have a good scope on what your members are doing and what they're up to, because they can bring law enforcement into your group. You know what I mean? Because the brotherhood thing is so strong that if I'm a brother of you and I come to you and I'm like, I need your help, your instinct is to be like, I'm going to help you.
Absolutely.
But if you have a good leader, they might be like, well, what is it?
Yeah.
I'll help you with this, but no, we ain't doing that.
And one of the rules in the Mongols was that you can't ask another Mongol to do something that could risk them going to prison or jail. Right.
That's a good rule.
And for that main, there's a million reasons for that reason. But because we're brothers, and if a brother asks for help, I'm going to help. Right. And so that's kind of that gray area where they get in there.
And if you agree, if like, hey, this could send us to prison, and as a brother you consent to help, then that's on you, right? That's not a club thing, but you could agree.
And to your earlier piece, a lot of that violence or those, not passing 1% or that stuff, it comes from a level of respect, right? People they want to be respected, and the difference is the dudes that have self-worth and self-esteem that know who they are, they'll give someone a pass. Or like for me, someone's, you're not supposed to touch a Mongol's patch. If someone touched my patch, hey man, all due respect, don't do that again before you just, whoop on them. But then there's guys that don't, right? Or this whole...
Well, they're the bloodthirsty, like you touched on, they're not all legit and civilized. So they're the bloodthirsty. There is an element to it that guys, did you witness that? When did you first witness it? Like the bloodthirst within the clubs. Guys, when you started coming around the outsiders and the Vagos, did people test you to see what your worth was?
And I wanted to prove myself. I just grew up in this violent skinhead gang, right? And I was like, I want to show these guys I'm a badass. I can fight. Let me, because at the time too, so going back to hanging around the outsiders, a guy I knew an outsider had worked at the Harley dealership. I'm spending time with him. And I was like, hey man, invite me out. Like I want to go out. So I started hanging out. And at the time, most of these guys, this is an older generation of bikers. So these are like the beer-bellied, long-haired, classic rock listening bikers, And at the time, all I cared is that, they're in a club, this is cool, and I wanted to show them my worth, right? Like, I'm this violent kid from the streets, and I got your back, you know? Right. And so, I probably instigated a few fights to try and show them. Never worked out in my favor. If you read my book, there's some funny times. But so that was kind of my goal at first. And then there was a moment where I was sitting in that clubhouse and, it was all smoky. And so at the time I'd started prospecting, I was a manager of an adult video store because like I was in tour a lot for bands. So it was one of those things I could come back and do. My buddy owned it. And it was a chill gig for your 20s. It was cool. But I'd get off work at 3:30. I'd go to the clubhouse, check in, wipe down the bar, stock the bar. And if a patch holder came in, you're there till he sends you home. So sometimes I'd be home at 6. Sometimes be called back. Sometimes I'd be there till 4 in the morning and then have to expect to get up and go to work in the morning.
This is why you're a prospect?
Yeah. Which also something I changed down the road for a lot of that lifestyle too is because sometimes that's how people get involved in drugs and stuff, right? As you're getting off prospecting duties at 4 a.m. You got to be at work at 6. Like it's to me, it's not a big brotherly thing, but that's a side quest. But so that was happening, and I remember just kind of being discouraged. And I looked around the room, and I was like, man, if it wasn't for this like motorcycles, I got nothing in common with anybody here. And I mean that with all due respect; these were great guys. But I was like, this isn't someone I'd come over for a barbecue or call up to go to a movie with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
And that's really when I started thinking about like trying to find a club that like was more like-minded, and that's when I fell in the Vagos. I was in Reno. I just moved to Reno, and it was a lot of younger guys, skateboarders, punk rock. And I was like, see, there is younger guys that, aren't all grungy and like, like to ride their bikes hard, but also go to the punk concerts at night. And I was like, now this aligns with my morals. Like, this is what I'm into. And so that's why I jumped into that.
Well, let's talk about, like you just described it. Like, what's it like to ride with the Vagos? Like, is it side by side, wheel to wheel, 100 miles an hour, adrenaline all the time? Like, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people that are going to watch this that are ride a motorcycle and think they know about club life a little bit, but can you kind of talk about what life in the Vagos is? A top 10 club, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I joined it, they weren't as big as they are now, for sure. But even the outsiders, any of those outlaw clubs, I mean, the pride is in how hard you can ride, especially in a group, but that you can maintain your own vehicle. You're doing your own oil changes, or if it's a bigger job, there's probably a brother that can do it, but you're not taking your stuff to the Harley dealership. The outsiders at the time, they were a chopper club. So if you bought a newer bike, they called the guy Store-Bought Scott because he had a new bike. And this was back before people were riding baggers like they are now. And the Vagos were the same, with just, especially when you got guys that are in their 20s, like everyone's trying to impress and race each other. And,
driving old rigid shovel heads and stuff.
And it's just a hard riding club, or all the clubs are at that point once you get to that outlaw stuff. But 100 miles an hour, wheel to wheel, handlebar to handlebar. And if you don't know how to do it, man, you're going to figure it out pretty quick, or you're going to get left behind.
I met a lot of guys with one leg, I mean, there's a lot of guys that get in a lot of accidents just trying to keep up, probably, right?
Yeah, and especially, California, because of the lane filtering and stuff.
Yeah.
And not just lane filtering, just the traffic in general, people leaving and out. There's different state by state, things are all pretty different, but all the clubs across the country pride themselves on how hard they can ride.
It's dangerous to be in a club. You got the law enforcement looking at you, you got other clubs looking at you, and you got traffic.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, riding a motorcycle is inherently dangerous no matter what, right? And so you have that on top of everything else.
Now, how'd you transition into Vagos? Did they recruit you, or did you kind of just...
Yeah, I was down there. I'd left the Outsiders for a job in Nevada, and I was still a prospect. I hadn't patched in yet. And they said, hey, I think they're excited. I was one of the few younger guys coming around. And so they said, hey, if you're there for work, if you come back, you can pick up where you left off. And here's some clubs down there we get along with if you want to meet some clubs. So I rode down there. I was working for a little bit. A couple weeks in, I was like, man, I want to run a ride with somebody. And so I went to a Confederation of Clubs meeting, and there was like all the clubs were there. It was the first time I've seen Hell's Angels. And it was the first time I've seen Vagos, actually. And I was wearing like a denim vest over my over my leather jacket because that was kind of the look anyways. Yeah. But then I saw them walking around and that's their uniform. And I was like, shit, man, are these guys going to think I'm trying to be one of them? And I was actually kind of trying to avoid them. And there was another club called the Booze Fighters that I was kind of riding. I hadn't just met. They'd brought me up there. So this meeting's filtering out, and I was like, I got to go say hi to these guys for the Outsiders. And the Booze Fighters said, hey, we'll be at this bar down the street. And again, pre-nav, right? So it's like, go 4 lights down, take a right. Yeah. This is in Reno. They said, you'll see the bikes. And so go down to the bar to meet them up. I see a bunch of green. I pull in, and it's a Vago party.
The Booze Fighters.
And I rode past the prospects right into this gate because I thought, and as soon as I looked up, I'm like, damn, dude.
And you had a denim jacket on, so they probably thought you were supposed to be coming in.
And all eyes were on me, and I wasn't going to peel out of there, right? I live here. I got to have my respect. And so I backed my bike up to the curb and just kind of rolled, like, here we go. And I wasn't drinking at the time, but I bought a bottle of beer just in case and sat against the back. And the president came and talked to me and, what are you doing here? And we started talking. And what really went a long way for me is I started a new job the next day. And when I got my lunch break, I picked up my phone and he had called. How's your first day of work going? Is there anything you need?
Checked in with you to see how you're doing?
Man. And, I'm in a new area. I didn't know people. Next, I'm going to his house for dinners. He's the one that gave me my nickname Mooch down the road. But so I was going to his house for dinner, hanging out. And so they were starting a new chapter and ended up probationary patching me so I didn't prospect because in theory I'd come from another club even though I wasn't a patch holder. And they needed the numbers for the chapter. And so I ended up patching in that way.
Oh, wow.
How long were you in Vagos?
Just shy of 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, did you move up the ranks or did you just start to think about what's your role going to be like in the leadership, or did you decide like I'm going to stay here at this level, or when do you start to?
Yeah, at the time I was just trying to do what I could to try and learn how to be a good member and learn the ropes and what was expected. And if I was smart enough to do that beforehand, I probably wouldn't have joined that club. I mean, all due respect to that club, but it wasn't a good fit for me.
Okay.
I just was blindsided by these young kids and hard riding. And but yeah, no, leadership was never my intention ever anyways. And I think, sometimes naturally you'll kind of progress your way up, but I was still new to that club. So my twin brother had joined with me too. And it was kind of our intention to just get our name out there. So we were just on our bikes every weekend, like all over California, Nevada. Like we were just out there trying to meet new chapters and meet the guys and, get our name out there.
Okay. So you really just became earlier we were talking about, you became a great marketer for them too, just to be around, just to, fly the flag. Patch.
And I was going to places that probably not like the older guys weren't going, right? So I was going to these bars and places that, a lot of people didn't see club guys. And, I was trying to have a single guy, trying to go where the hot chicks are, but I was going to different places too. And I think that played a big role.
You were in Vagos about just shy of 2 years, and you said you left for reasons that you just didn't fit in, right? And you've got a book called The Ride of My Life.
Yes.
And I actually read that book, and I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, was there some infighting, some violence within the Vagos? In my career in law enforcement, I had a case against a Sacramento-based Vagos group, and some of them were indicted, and they were doing some drug stuff. And while I was there, I noticed that they definitely were not shy to jump in on anything. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And in the book, am I wrong? Were you talking about there was some infighting within the club, and that kind of goes against your morals, your beliefs of club life?
Yeah, like I'd said before, about the skinhead stuff and moving up, like I didn't believe in brothers fighting brothers. And there was a moment where a Vago coming back from Mexico was killed, and there was always speculation on who did it and who knows, right? But it was the first time I was kind of like thinking that was could be a thing, right? Like I'm going to these parties to hang out and have fun and meet people. I didn't have to be worried about my own people, around my own group. And I had enough of that in the skinhead days where it's like, hey, this is a fun party, and around midnight everyone's drunk. The old guys are getting drunk, and it's like, it's time to get out of here,
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to be a part of that. And it got to the point where there was some issues going on in Northern California with Shasta County and the Sacramento guys, and I watched the way they were treating each other. And then I was sitting in a church in a group, our meetings, we call them church, and we were talking about how we were having beef with another chapter in our same state, and how they were going to come to this meeting and where we're going to start stashing the guns for protection. And I was like, man, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is supposed to be my brothers. We're in the same club, and now we're like worried that we have to defend ourselves.
Right. Yeah, are we defending the door or defending our back door, right?
Yeah.
Like, who do I watch, my own guys or the other guys?
So that was it for me at that. You know, I had known a Mongol in Carson City who ended up being an informant, unfortunately. But I mean, whatever. I ended up knowing a lot of dudes that were informants, and I never got in trouble because I didn't do anything illegal. So
let's talk about that. It's a good point, and I think it brings up an interesting point because we have talked about a club as a whole isn't committing crimes, but they're so full of informants. They're so full of or basically law enforcement scrutiny and investigation. They're always trying to get in. If they're not committing crimes, and I'm not saying they are, they're not, but as a point, if they're not committing crimes, how are there informants? Why are there snitches? Why is there people in the own club reporting, and what are they reporting?
For sure. And so, you know, like I said, I've seen it firsthand on my end as well. And we did talk a little off air about just that law enforcement narrative, right? That clubs are criminal organizations, and that, you know, we're visible, wearing patches. And that's what I was saying, you know, if someone gets busted, they can say, yeah, you know, the neighborhood will say, oh, I see those guys, right?
Right.
So they're high profile. You know, there's movies about, I mean, there's people call them the mafia on wheels, right? So it's that like, it's that idea that the public can buy into.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you said, hey, we're doing these investigations, the public might say, why? What are you doing, right? So I don't think anyone's sticking up for them. I think it's a secret society, so to speak. So they're not speaking up for themselves. They are nowadays, but, you know, at the time.
Yeah.
So I think it was, I don't want to call it an easy target, but it was just, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it was one of those things. And especially, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s, for sure, they were doing illegal stuff, man.
Right.
Policing has changed. People have changed. Lifestyles changed. And
Right.
it's just, you can't really do that anymore. Or, you know, as a club level without getting caught at least. Yeah. So yeah, I think, you know, the informant thing is the sketchy one because a lot of it is usually someone that, you know, like I said, I told you guys off air, in my region, we weren't allowed to do meth.
Right.
So there's be some guy that might be doing meth, gets caught, and he doesn't want to do the time, so he becomes an informant. Right. And, you know, law enforcement's always going to want to know, even if, like in Oregon, we weren't doing anything illegal, but we were new there, so they want to know how many guys you got, what clubs are they talking to, you know what I mean? How are they recruited? So there's always going to be that information piece that they're going to get out of informants, whether you're doing anything illegal or not. And that's a lot of what I saw, because I remember, you know, looking back over the years, the few informants that we crossed paths with. And, you know, if I was doing illegal stuff, I wouldn't be here to talk to you about it because with the amount of informants I bumped into.
Yeah,
know?
Right.
But at the time I was wondering, like, these guys are getting, someone were getting paid $3-4 grand a month. And I was thinking, for what? Because there's nothing happening
to report.
But the flip side to that is this guy wants to justify his paycheck. His handler probably wants to get some info. So all of a sudden he's saying, yeah, the guys are stealing bikes, man, you know, or, you know, something but we can't catch them doing it because they're not doing it. But, and then it goes back to, you know, I don't want to use the word entrapment because I know the legal piece of it, but we were saying before though, just that at least enticing, stuff.
Right.
And a lot of times I saw it, that's who I saw it from, was the informants and the undercovers, more to justify their investigation, so to speak.
You know, it's crazy because coming from where I come from as a kid, I understood the mafia life, I understood the law enforcement life, and I understood the outlaw motorcycle life, right? When I became a cop, I still had family that were in the outlaw motorcycle. And as a cop, as I did investigations in whatever major club it was, I investigated. The one disheartening thing to me, almost like the mob guys, they have the code of omerta we talk about all the time. There's no omerta, right? The code of silence is really, it's just, it was supposed to be a thing, but it really just dissolved.
Right.
For me, it was disheartening when I started investigating these clubs or when we had an incident at a club and we had to go, you know, interview somebody or pull some guys over. Bro, it's so crazy how they wear this patch and they think they're at the mindset. Bro, they would just cave in a second.
Yeah.
They would just start vomiting shit from the, you know, just vomit. Like the minute you get them pinned, they just talk. And the intelligence is where it's at. So the definition of an informant, you think they're getting, not everybody's getting paid. Some guys are just, like you said, they're mechanics or they're just regular people. So they're giving up intel. And intel and law enforcement is everything.
Right.
But I was so disheartened. I used to sit there like, man, because again, I thought in my life as a young kid, I was going to go outlaw, like, you know, to go in some kind of OG group. So I'm like, you're just telling this cop everything. And I'm a cop. And I'm sitting there going, man, shut your mouth. Like, what are you doing? Not that I was cheering for him, but I was like so disheartened.
Yeah.
Like there's this code of omerta, and the minute he gets pulled over and he's looking at 5 tickets, so where are you on the way to the club? Oh, I'm just going to church. Well, who's there? I don't know. Is Mooch going to be there tonight? Yeah, I think he's going to be there. You just gave up. You're an informant. You just gave up intel.
And I think, like you said, the part about being disappointed is I think there's this, we all have, especially law enforcement, sports, gangs, we all have these morals and values that we hold dear to us, right? And if you look at law enforcement, I'm pretty sure from what I've heard, they were always told not to talk to police either, right? Like there's,
And
right?
it's the, that's right.
And you know, and the cops are called snitches by other cops too, right? So like everyone has these shared morals and values. They just doesn't want to be out in the open like that.
That's right.
And so you're holding yourself to that value, and you see someone else break it. It's just disheartening. It's discouraging. And the one thing I've always really wrestled with is mob, for example, just reading about it, how all these guys do all this crazy stuff and start telling on each other. But especially motorcycle clubs, because not only you're telling on someone, but this is your brother, right? That's what this is supposed to be built off of. And what I noticed too, and this goes back to the violence and that type of stuff too, is back in the day, the typical guy that joined a motorcycle club was a guy like me, had a reputation already. He came from something, right? Already, like, other than when I tried to impress the outsiders, as I got older, I didn't have to impress anyone. I don't care if anyone thinks I'm tough or not tough. I, not that it's much, but I know what I'm capable of, and it's nothing to impress. But then nowadays, because they're taking so many people, and it's a rush for membership, they're taking these guys that aren't from that life, that aren't about that life. The first thing they do is put a patch on. They're playing a role, and they're the ones going in bar fights and shooting at each other because you know who I am. They're scared to get beat up because they've never been beat up. And then on the flip side, those are the same guys. They're the ones that want to have that quick image and everything comes with it. But the minute they get caught, and they're victims all of a sudden, right? Oh, man, but I got a family. Or, hey, they would have told on me, or whatever stuff they do to justify snitching.
You're bringing up a lot of emotion and interesting points. And you mentioned earlier, like, even law enforcement says don't talk to the cops. Don't snitch on each other. And that's true. It's true.
Absolutely
try the blue line's real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there can be some lack in administration and leadership on both sides. Like, if you don't bring in quality people, as you're describing yourself to be, like, you come with some credibility. You've been vetted. That was the whole point of prospecting originally, right? That's the whole point of FTO, field training, is like, let's vet the guy out before we let him all the way in. And if you let him all the way in and he's been vetted, then you don't have to worry about, do I trust this guy? I know I trust this guy, right? So the type of informants that I've seen coming from within bike clubs specifically is they maybe had a drug problem. Maybe they struggled with finances. Maybe they had committed a gas station robbery. I'm not saying it's a small crime, but smaller crimes. They get pinched up. They got a family. They don't have any money. So they're like, what about the club? And the guy's got nothing else to talk about because he doesn't really commit crimes. He just has a habit.
Right.
Or he's done a couple things. So he's going to tell them basically whatever they want to hear. You know what I mean? And they're hoping there's something good in there, but there's not always something good in there.
And see, and that's the type of guy that joined a club for selfish reasons. That's a selfish person, right? If you join for the brotherhood and be there, and especially if you know, hey, I'm not a criminal, then take your licks where your licks come, right? Like, we discussed a little bit off air, but how everyone thinks, motorcycle club guys deal drugs, right? I've never dealt drugs in my life. And I had told you guys when we got raided in 2008, my brother was like, look in the fridge. You think we're dealing drugs? And don't get me wrong, with the connections I have, like we said, how many people I met over the years, I probably could have got into that, but I didn't want to because I don't want the consequences that come with it, right? I've always been that guy that what's the outcome that's going to come out of this? And if you can't do the time, then don't be doing it, right? And so many people come in here for the flashy cars and the women and the quick money, but then they get caught, and instead of saying, okay, I've made my choices, they just want to start telling on people. And that's where I get disgusted when it comes to informants and stuff. It's like, hey man, what makes you better than the next guy, right? But you're doing this for your family. What about their family, right? And so that's where obviously the way we feel about informants, and it's not necessarily because they're telling, it's because it's doing some shameful stuff. They're like throwing other people under the bus where they're the ones that should be standing in front of it.
I trust me, I think everybody, no matter which side of the fence you're on, feels the same way about informants. If an informant has discovered a horrific crime that bothers them and they felt in their own genuine goodness that they should report it,
different.
That's different than being a snitch.
Absolutely.
If I got caught up doing some stuff I shouldn't be doing and I want to get out of it and I think that my life is more valuable than yours, I'm going to tell on you, that's a snitch. I think we could all agree to that, right?
We had an informant in Oregon that I was taking, because we had the no meth rule, I was taking him, took him to drug and alcohol counseling. I took him to rehab. I was doing family therapy for this guy. And the whole time he's getting paid to try and tell on me for stuff, and it was like, that's the stuff that breaks your heart. Because you're like, hey man, I was just trying to be a good brother. And then hear this guy's drug problem. And again, held himself above everybody else.
All right, this is the perfect time for us to take another break. So we're going to go to break real quick. We'll be back with Justin in a minute. And we're going to talk about his life transitioning from the Vagos into the Mongols. We'll be right back. So welcome back to Inside the Life. We're here with Mooch. And we're going to just, before we get into the whole transitioning from the Vagos to the Mongols, I just want to get your perspective on when you're in the Vagos, there's an organized group you're in now, a little bit more polished, earning money. Everybody thinks that the Sons of Anarchy is how they run guns from Mexico, they're killing people, they're human trafficking, they're doing all this stuff on a daily basis, right, and then killing each other. The life is not like that.
Absolutely.
From my experience, it's a lot of security gigs, right? Like in the early or late 70s. I mean, the HA guys were doing all the security for a lot of rock concerts and stuff. But did you guys earn money together? Was it security gigs that, you worked the door at clubs, or how'd you earn money together as a club?
Yeah. As a whole, there was no monetary value in it. Like we've said before, how much money it costs to be in a club. But also when it comes to that networking piece, right? Like I grew up in the punk scene. So if I get offered, hey, you got 4 guys that want to do some security at this, at this concert or whatever, sure, I'm going to bring my brothers with me. And of course, if I'm going to bring someone, it's going to be people I trust, right? Yeah. So there's pieces like that. So it's not inherently criminal, but there's ways we can help each other out. But it's not going to the chapter treasury. It's not going paid up. Mm-hmm. So, same thing if you're a carpenter and you get a buddy that needs a side gig, stuff like that. And, because these are working class clubs, those are things that did happen, right? Like, hey, I need help. I learned how to lay tile because one of the Vagos was a tile layer and he wanted me to do material handling. Yeah. And next thing you know, there's four Vagos on this team doing material handling. Right. So, we're making money together, but it's more of like a looking out for each other type piece. Yeah. And I know like the examples you said, definitely back in the day, they were doing that stuff and other clubs maybe, but from my experience, we need to make money to go on runs, but there's no making money for the group. There's no paying away your way up or being an earner, stuff like that.
Yeah, because I know like traditionally they would have ties to organized crime, traditional Italian organized crime, the mafia. Yeah. And growing up in the Northeast and across the country now, there's still an element of that where the mob guys in the 70s, 80s, and some of the 90s, they were really using patched-in guys in clubs to do collections, to do extortions, to do, ride around and do what they couldn't do, high-profile stuff. They would use that stuff. Yeah. It's not necessarily the clubs you were in, but they do traditionally do that.
Absolutely.
The mob and the bikers.
Looking at Cleveland, the history of the Cleveland with Butch Crouch. I don't know if you guys know about that, but they were doing... they were working for Danny Green and the Italian mob, and they were blowing up cars on both sides. Yeah.
Those are individuals in a club using their own network, right? Yeah, club guys go to prison, go to jail, they meet another guy, they come out.
And this was an era way before mine, but my take on that always was, again, these were hard partying guys who wanted to figure out a way to keep the party going and didn't want to get jobs, and so stuff comes up, and now the Angels got so big and prolific that people were scared of them and they could use that. So I think they played into it back then, but on the flip side, nowadays it's the opposite because everyone's looking at them. You can't be doing like what good would I be doing security if I stand out like that, right? I got Mongols blasted on the back of my head or, those types of things.
But the stereotype carries. When I infiltrated the mafia, I was running my own crew inside. They gave me the task of killing 2 main guys inside the mafia. So I asked them, do you want me to use guys in the crew? They're like, no. And they already met Dutch, right? So they had this mindset on him. And him and another guy came out here to Vegas and met my capo. And then when it came time to do the deed of killing these 2 guys that I was contracted to do, I said, well, who do you want me to use? And he says, I don't know. Who do you got?
Use your biker buddy.
What about that guy? So he literally asks, right? And he turns around and I said, all right, so we talk about how we're going to kill him. We're planning a murder. And he had it in his mind of what these guys were and thinking, I think he associated him with HA, right? Because it's just his mindset. Yeah. He's in the Northeast. And on the recordings, it's hysterical because he's telling me like, so just get him to do one of them bombs that they make. Or he automatically thought he had military grade weapons. And he goes, just get a grenade, walk in there, throw it in the social club and just kill everybody.
For sure. And that's what's crazy is because they did do that stuff back in the day, right? And I think because of that stigma's not going anywhere. Yeah, and people don't want to believe it's not a thing like that anymore, right? They love Sons of Anarchy and all those shows. Like people want to believe that.
And these are old school guys. These guys are in their 70s at the time. So he had called back to the bosses back home, from here out in, Nevada, calls back home. And he wants them to know on a tape call that we were recording. And he wants them to know that these guys and what they are. And he goes, they're like angels from hell. And that's the only thing he said on tape. And these 4 old guys from the mob, understood exactly. So the persona was there. And
it's that tough guy image, right?
Yeah,
that's the big part of it is tough guy image. And here's a tough guy image, and these guys are supposed to be, they'll never snitch. Right. They don't talk. It's that whole lifestyle they've heard of. So why wouldn't they be great for something like that?
You guys have already lived a life that way, so it's an assumption that that's the way they are. That's the TV producing. That's the image you guys have given. And I will say, when I was hanging around with the club guys, there is something very powerful about walking into a bar or public place with 15 or 20 or more dudes. When you walk in, they move out of your way. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just splits the sea. And I mean, I've been around the mob guys, and they're scary guys too. But they're wearing suit and ties. Yeah. It's a different thing. Nobody moved out of our way. When I walked in with guys like you, it's split. You walk right up to the bar and get whatever you wanted. It's a good feeling.
It's a good feeling, but also that attracts the people that I was talking about before.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Is guys like us. I've always felt like in my neighborhood where I grew up by name, people already treated me like that anyways, right?
You didn't need the patch.
Yeah, but these guys put a patch on and they're like,
Right.
like this feeling. And that's definitely something that I've talked about since I left the club. Is a lot of people will say, Mooch was high profile in the club and he's still being high profile. I was like, man, I'm the same guy whether I have this patch or not. I was the same guy no matter what. And what drew me to motorcycle clubs was riding motorcycles and partying with my friends. And so if you see me riding motorcycles and partying with my friends, I'm doing the same thing because I've always been the same guy.
Let's talk about the Mongols and get right to that, because I know you had a significant role there. You were the mother chapter. You had a lot of leadership. Take us down the path of the Mongols.
Yeah. So, I told you I'd known a guy in Nevada, and I was ready to get away from the Vagos. And there was most of my chapter of the Vagos had said, hey, if we're going to go somewhere else, some of these guys have already been in some other clubs. And, it's normally not a good look to go from club to club. At the time, the Vagos weren't as high, high on the same level as Mongols. And I mean that respectfully. And now they're all both big clubs. But they said if we were to go to another club, it'd be the Mongols. And I said, well, hey, I happen to know a guy, So I kind of picked his brain, and a lot of things were lining with me, like not allowed to fight each other. And here now I'm coming from an anti-racist skinhead group, and now here's a multiracial club, more Hispanics, a lot less of that white power stuff. And then these guys were all, the Mongols are very militant and uniform. And so here's these guys with crisp 501s on and boots and clean vests, and there was none of that grungy, dirty stuff. And I was like, now this is what I can get into this, So it was really attractive to me. And so they had me fly out to Florida to do a sit down. And looking back, this is crazy, man. I'm still a Vago.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a Vago shirt for who knows why.
Yeah.
I fly out to outlaw territory that had just gone into it, the Vagos in Georgia during that time. And to meet some Mongols I've never met in my life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Solo by myself.
Yeah, that's gnarly.
And just kind of threw it out there. And I went to a bar with them one night, and I kind of touched on them a little bit in my book, but they were doing a meeting with the outlaws, and it was a really, really sketchy one. And at one point they told me, hey, dude, like, you don't have to be here. And I was, if I show up with you, I'm going to leave with you, man. And so that's what I told them. And they said, well, all right. And so ever since then, they were like, all right, you got this pass. And so I was allowed to start my chapter in Oregon because there was no Mongols in Oregon, which is how I kind of jumped into leadership, is because there was no one else there to do it. And then just me being me, it's like I said, it's an area I'm from, and I network. And so I started to grow pretty quick. And, people used to always ask, like, Mooch, how are you being so good at recruiting? But I've never recruited ever. I've never asked anyone to join my club. What I've seen is I want people to come up to me, and like, if I'm going out in the bar and, we're doing security and people like see it, right? They see that attracts people that like structure. It attracts militant dudes and ex-gang dudes, but also we're smiling, having fun. We got hot chicks.
Yeah.
Like guys see that and go, damn, I want to be a part of that. And so I've never had to recruit from that wave. And I knew these guys from the punk rock scene and hardcore scene and stuff like that. But it really changed that whole image. And then, got to the point where, same thing with prospects. You hear this stuff like, well, I'll never prospect. I don't want to be treated like a bitch. And I'm like, well, none of my members are bitches, right?
Right.
But on the flip side, that whole mentality of having them do errands or climb a tree in their underwear or whatever dumb stuff they used to have to do, I cut all that out. Because I was like, how are we supposed to get the prison shot caller or the tough guy over here and then treat them like that, right? And so it turned into this really respect thing that we'd go out, and the way we looked and the program we ran attracted people. And so we started getting pretty big in Oregon. And then I got busted in 2008. And I was put on 5 years non-association. I wasn't allowed to hang out at the club, but I continued to. So I kept going back to jail for months and months at a time. And then in 2008 was the Black Rain. And so that's when I went back to school, because I was like, man, there was a brother named Richie Rich, or I think he's still in the Mongols, and he has a PhD in clinical psychology. And this dude's like your size, he's blasted with his neck. Everything looks like he just walked off the prison yard, and he was talking about that stabbing that happened in Sturgis years ago with the Angels and Mongols, and he goes, man, I can't find a job. He goes, that I can't find a job that pays anything more than $100K a year. He's like, all they're offering me is $100K, and I was like, what kind of problem you have? Like,
I'll do that, right?
What are you doing where that's the problem?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, he's in drug and alcohol counseling. I was like, well, man, if this guy can do it, I could probably do that. And by then, I'd been coming in and out of jail over and over for to me, not violating the law, right? I remember sitting there looking around at jail, and I was like, man, I don't feel like I'm a criminal, right? Like, but here I am in jail every couple months. And so I was like, this isn't the lifestyle I want to live. I need to figure something out. And so I decided to go back to school.
I think real quick, just because you touched on that, and it's in his book, and you should get it and you should read it, The Ride of My Life. You were indicted, you were arrested, you were charged. A lot of those charges dropped down. You were convicted of some pretty petty crimes, but you had a long probation period, and your in and out of jail had to do with the violation of probations for hanging out with other Mongols against those probation rules, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that, that was one of the things too, because, we were just talking about informants and all that stuff. And I hit these charges. Initially, it was a conspiracy to commit kidnapping on a federal agent because I was following someone I didn't know was a federal agent, and they're saying I had forced him from one lane to another, so he moved in the direction he wanted to go. You can imagine. Thankfully, I didn't play well with the jury, but man, I had a $14 million bail, and then it was $1.4 million.
Yeah,
I was in single cell solitary the whole time. It was really this big played out. We got this Mongol boss here. And the whole time I refused to take a plea bargain because I was like, I didn't feel that I committed any crimes, right? And a pretty big risk.
Ballsy.
Yeah, man. I mean, sometimes I get in the zone,
25 years at least, or maybe life even?
Yeah, it would have been a long time. I'd probably still be there,
Had to play out.
And they offered me a plea bargain of 2 years, and I was like, but my other co-defendants took plea bargains, and they didn't have criminal records, so they didn't have really do much time. And but even then, I was like, I don't want to do 2 years for stuff that, it was just the principle of the fact.
Right.
So I took it to a jury trial and I won. I got found guilty of a couple of misdemeanors, but everything else. And it's one of those things now that, I got sentenced to a year, and I technically did a day in jail after being sentenced because of the security matrices, right? Like now I'm in there on reckless driving. These overcrowded jails, they kicked me out. But I did at least my year, if not more, on violations.
Right. Yeah.
And that was one of those things where people go back and talk about informants and this stuff, and they're like, "Yeah, well, Mooch did a day," and I was like, "Grab my paperwork, man." I took my shit to a jury trial, And nowadays, people are like weaponizing the term, calling people a snitch or out bad, because but with no paperwork. And back in my day, like you had to have paperwork. Yeah, I know when Pee Wee wrote his book, man, the whole back half of his book is all of his court paperwork
to prove it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's skip to where you moved to Illinois, get permission from the Outlaws, open one in St. Louis or whatever. And let's touch on Blaine and how that impacted you, if it did at all. But I feel like it was a pretty big turning point. So I'm just finishing my graduate program in Oregon, and I was doing an internship at the Oregon Youth Authority. And this is that's who I wanted to work with. I was really excited. And they gave me I got hired as an intern, and they gave me a slip of paper with an address. So here's where you go for the training. So I pull up to the training, and it's the Oregon State Police Academy. And so I remember calling my wife going, I don't think this is going to last long. Right. And I'm walking through the parking lot, and the first cop sees me steps dead in his tracks and staring at me. And I got a bit of an ego, but I was like, man, I can't imagine. Right. Turned out it was the chief of police. Right? Really? So I get into the building. And you got Mongols tattooed on the back of your head, right?
I mean, again, not to sound cocky, but they're probably teaching a class on me somewhere in that room, you know? And so every time I had to take a leak, everyone's staring at me. I think I went throughout half the day, and they pulled me out. And, they asked if I was in the club. And again, I always say, yeah, man, and here's why it's a positive. And so I got fired for being in the club. So I sued and I won. But now my face is all over the paper. I'm trying to get a job as a social worker, and I've been all over the paper at the time. And so I was like, I'm heavy into jiu-jitsu at the time. And I said, maybe a move is a good idea. Get out of Oregon. I was pretty burnt out on club stuff. By now I'd been in 10 years. So I actually moved out there to somewhat retire, kind of stay away from club stuff, but I guess that's not my personality. And I moved. So I got permission from the Outlaws to live there, not to start a chapter. I didn't want to box myself in corners, so I wouldn't, but I said I have no intentions on starting a chapter out here. And wasn't there long before I ran into a group of guys that wanted to join, and I was like, well, who am I to tell them no? And so we started that St. Louis chapter. And that was to appease the Outlaws in the fact that some of the guys were in Illinois, and we called it Missouri, so that we didn't have that territory stuff. And things were good, and I went from, there was 2 members in Kansas City when I moved out there. Now there's 4 chapters in Missouri. I started 2 in Illinois and 4 in Indiana. So, I mean, we grow pretty quick, out there.
Really.
And then, all these things resurfaced. It was like starting the Mongols in Oregon, where I was like looking at death threats and looking over my shoulder. Second time in my life that the ATF or this time was FBI came and told you there's credible threat on your life. And, these things all get taken pretty seriously. And then there's internal club drama going on, and there's so much stuff. And then my brother Blaine Scoops was murdered at another club had said, hey, there'll never be Mongols here. And, we were pretty cocky about it. And we said, well, we'll see about that. And like we said off air, I brought 200 bikes to the Lake of the Ozarks Bike Week to show them here we are, and it didn't help. He got shot and killed. And at that, right around that same month, there was an ex-outlaw that was trying to join the Mongols. And at the time, we had a rule that we couldn't take their ex-members, but a good friend of mine. And so, I'd helped him join a Pagans chapter, and he got murdered for that. And so this is all in my own backyard. And at the same time, the FBI are saying, hey, Outlaws have a hit on you too. And now I'm looking at the club for some sort of guidance, and they had just thrown out our national P, and people were suggesting that I run for national P, which I didn't want to. Right. I used to say, go to an all members meeting, stand up front and say, raise your hand if you've ever been a national P. I go, no one's going to raise their hand because they're either in prison or thrown out. Right. It's like, and so I didn't want anything to do with that. and the leadership thought I did, so they were taking away my regions and changing some of the programs I'd started, and I was just really feeling pushed out. And I remember thinking, every time I put on this patch, I know the risk that comes with it, right? And the risks were heavy at this time. But the less and less I believed in it, the harder and harder it was to put on.
What's National P?
Yeah, so that would be the national president, or technically this day and age, international president, but it's the overall leader of the club.
So each club chapter has a president, and then you still have a hierarchy above that. And a national P, would he actually have control over his other presidents?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because that's one of those things where every club's slightly different on how they do it. But the way the Mongols set up is that pretty much everything's voted on, but the national P can still flip the switch on or off, right?
Okay.
And so each chapter has its own president. And then I developed a program where there was a regional boss, because that way there was someone there to make sure everyone's working together. And then from there, then it goes into the mother chapter, which is a group leadership. And then the mother chapter president would be the national president.
Okay.
And so I ended up retiring initially and covering up my tattoos, which created a pretty big stir within the club, because I was retired in good standings. And people were upset I was covering up my tattoos. But the way I was looking at it, I was just trying to show nothing but respect. I didn't want to represent something that I wasn't anymore. And, I'm out here, I ended up having a book come out and being on podcasts. And if I was doing that, representing myself as a member, I thought that'd be disrespectful,
right.
So I covered up my tattoos. And then shortly after, my status was changed out bad.
Wow.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of people would assume, and that's a great point, and I actually believe that and understand. A lot of people would assume that you snitched or you committed a major club violation or something like that, but it sounds to me like you have one friend who was killed, you have another friend, Scoops, who was killed, you're feeling all this pressure, and then now you've also started a new career, right?
Yeah.
And so you got Mongols tattoos on. You've already been kicked out of one training program because you had them, so there's a lot of reasons to cover them up. You're out bad, and that's okay. That's the way it is, and that's the way it does. Where's your life at now?
So I think out bad was almost a blessing for me, because if I was still in good standings, I'd have to follow their rules, and I would have had 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and I likely would have probably decided to come back. I don't know. But being shoved out that door really opened this whole world up to me to be able to write my book and start going on these podcasts. And
so could you guys take a break right there and explain to me and the audience that doesn't know out bad?
Like,
the definition of it. Like, you're out bad is you're out, but is there an act of violence towards you? Or is there, how do you go out bad?
Yeah. So, traditionally, out in bad standings, most clubs are on the same page. You stole from the club, you snitched on someone, you messed with someone's old lady, like any of those major violations, right? And you were out in bad standings, which means no contact, tattoos covered up. And that depending on what you did, some of them might not be very safe out and about, right? But nowadays it's been weaponized as a political term, because once you're out bad, you can't have contact with the club, right?
Okay.
So when I was retired, I could still have my influence on elections and those types of things. So nowadays out bad they're still both, right? But there's a very large collection of out bad guys, like I mentioned Pee-wee and some other guys that were major predominant leaders of these clubs that were put out bad essentially for no contact. But they aren't the type of out bad where they were doing anything untoward the club or violated any sort of commandments.
So if they see in public, they just can't acknowledge you. They won't really stay away from you.
It probably depends on personal stuff.
Right.
When I left, there was the message that got sent out was, Mooch has moved on with his life. He's out, but there's no ill will.
Yeah.
And essentially, the reason they changed my status to out bad is because my chapter had asked to take a step away, because the guy who took my place as president had gotten in beat up some outlaws, and the outlaw had snitched on him. And so he got a 5-year suspended sentence. So if he gets caught hanging out at the club, he's going to go to prison for 5 years. Well, his blood brother was in my chapter, his coworker, his roommate. And so no one wanted him to, we were a tight-knit chapter. We did jiu-jitsu together.
You still want to talk to him and be around him, right?
And so they asked permission to step, because in the Mongols, if you quit before 10 years, you're automatically out bad. Okay. And that's another thing that kind of watered down that term too, right? It's all sorts of guys that life happens, you get a new job, your family. But they said, hey, these guys are out bad, Mooch, and if you're going to keep hanging out with them, you are too. And I said, well, they essentially just said, don't post pictures with them, but I'm just not that guy. So I said, well, I'm just going to give you a heads up. Like, I know the rules, but these are my guys. And it was more that, half these guys don't even see that much anymore, but it was just the principle of it, And so that changed my status. And so initially, there was no ill will. Now, I'm going on podcasts and writing books and stuff. So if there's people might have personal beef, I don't know. But the club's not looking for me.
That's what I was going to point at. Like there might be low-hanging fruit, some lone wolves or something, but it sounds to me like you still have enough respect in the administration level of these organizations that they do respect you because they let you go out the way you wanted to, right? Not retire, but go out bad. But those lone wolves, God forbid they took a shot at you. You still have enough respect inside these organizations that they're going to have to answer those guys for any violence that comes
I'd like to
you.
hope so, and I'd like to hope that, I spent 15 years in that world doing positive stuff for it. And we had talked before about there's always people that are going to hate on it, or the jealous jealous types we've talked about, right?
Whole organization.
Those are the dudes that are running their mouth now, but hopefully the ones that were ever in leadership or worked with me or were tight with, when you're out bad, people aren't allowed to talk to you anymore. And when I was such a stickler for the rules. So if people are following the rules, I don't hold that against them at all. I totally get it. It's just if people are running their mouth, that one's different, but it is what it is.
I almost feel like we went out bad.
I know, yeah, seriously.
Yeah, so you see similarities.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to have retirement, and I feel like I went out bad because, again, guys are jealous. Everything you're saying, every organization is that way. I don't care if it's corporate America or, waste disposal, waste management. There's just jealousy. And if you succeed more, if they perceive that you succeeded or have something else, us sitting in this chair, they can smack talk you all you want, but until they walk in our shoes, they don't know what it's like.
Absolutely. So, and Jay Dobbins had something similar to his experience too, right?
Yeah, it's a common theme across the board. But now you work in social work. How do you decide to do that, and how does that come about?
Yeah, I started out in the drug and alcohol counseling program back when I went to school, and then I fell in love with psychology. I was like, man, I need, I'm a felon with head tattoos. I go, I need more than this 2-year degree, right? And so I really got into psychology. Which led me into social work for my master's degree. I just got my criminal record expunged last year, and I had a felony since I was 18, man. So
that's a big relief, right?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. So then I got really heavy into that. So I work with at-risk youth that they're at risk of being placed outside of the home in either foster care or juvenile detention. And essentially we're teaching a lot of parenting skills, but also, these kids with antisocial behaviors, whether they're in a gang or they're stealing or whatever, I'm trying to be there to teach them these skills to move forward in life and stay out of the system. So it's really rewarding. It's been really cool. I started a men's group. It's a weekly men's group, and it's mainly like X1 percenters or some first responders, ex-veterans, but just guys my age or middle-aged guys that devoted, similar to what you guys went through, you devoted your whole life to something and it gets taken away. What's your purpose?
Right.
What's next? And so I have a men's group that's really trying to help people find their purpose and like what's driving them.
Bro, I think that's amazing.
Yes.
I'm working now in the field of mental health, behavioral health, and addiction. And I set programs up for veterans and first responders and professionals.
Awesome.
And the work I do now, I always tell people when I do speaking gigs or something, or they come up to you and say, oh, you're a true patriot. My God, the 27 years of service you did. And I explain to people inside of me, the work I did, that doesn't define who I am. That's not what I want to be known for. The work I do now in the field I work in, mental health and addiction, that's what I want my legacy
absolutely.
To be, right?
And that's, I started started a podcast called Patched with an Ex-Hell's Angel, which was a big thing, right? I mean, that's probably what some of the club guys don't like me anymore either. But my whole goal is this Patch podcast we have on these X1 percenters. And I was trying to show the common theme. Like, I joined the Mongols because that was available to me in Oregon. My friends from the hardcore scene that joined the Outlaws, that's because that's who was there in their area. And the Sacramento guys from the hardcore scene, they joined the Angels, but we didn't pick a side because we hated each other. A lot of us joined for similar backgrounds. We had the same reason we wanted to join. And here we are out there killing each other. Yep. And what makes it worse is we're not killing each other for drug money or for profit. It's for ego. And so I'm really trying our show is really, that was the beginning premise of the show, and then it's also kind of turned into, what do you do now? You've been a 1%er your whole life. What's next? And so we talk about the mental health effects of what it's like being in a high, first responders, vets can understand that too, but what it's like living.
Is LTR your men's group?
No,
that's not it.
Yeah,
I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but I mean, that's a lifestyle I understand. That lift, train, ride. Like, I think those are good, healthy things. And I mean, if that's not it, that's fine.
It's part of the men's group. So LTR was, when I was active in the Mongols, my region, everyone had to work out 3 days a week. Train, lift, whatever. Just be healthy, right? Be happy. I saw too many people just going into a bottle, or all the time you're with the brothers at the bar, and you only get to know someone so well doing that, right? But you spend time on the mat with the guy, you spend time in the gym with the guy, you really develop that extra brotherhood. Plus, I noticed how much drama was done, because when you're at the bar drinking, you find something to talk about or someone to talk about, right? But if we're lifting weights and we're doing positive stuff, like, the people were happier. And so when I left the club, I really wanted to keep that going. And so initially it was the 5 guys from my chapter that we'd all left together. But we started this movement called LTR, where we're just anybody can do it, everyone can rep it. But we ride motorcycles, so it's lift, train, ride. We do yearly big rides that we do. The inner circle, we still do like a once a month meeting, but it's more like checking in, make sure everyone has to check in, they're getting their workouts done every week, just for that accountability piece. And so when I decided I wanted to start this men's group, I said, well, I'll offer it for free to the LTR guys, and so that I could figure out what works, what doesn't work. So that's where I'm at with that now, and then I'm gonna start opening one up to the public pretty soon.
Dude, that's awesome. It's groundbreaking work, because I know working with the first responders, I see the trauma, like you said, the common trauma bond. They went into law enforcement because they had some kind of trauma. A lot of guys and girls, whether it's veteran, war service, or and the work you do, and I especially when I run my groups, I make these guys understand. Listen, you're the first point of contact that guy in the street has, whether it's an outlaw, whether it's a common criminal, or what's a homeless person. Bro, empathy is everything.
Absolutely.
And understanding where if you can only understand where everybody else or that other person comes from, maybe you have a little more empathy for each other, and we'll look out for each other a little better.
For sure.
You know?
And we've talked about it here, but my big takeaway from the men's group is how much we all have in common.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're dealing with something, there's likely these 3 other guys in this group that either have or are dealing with it too, or they have. And so just using everybody else's experience and saying, hey, I'm not alone, right? Like this feeling I have where I'm lost and I don't know what's going on. I had this big thing happen and now I don't know what to do. We all have, a lot of us have gone through that and we can be here to help. So that's been the big takeaway.
Great message, bro. Great message.
Mooch, thank you so much for coming on Inside the Life with Giovanni and I. It's been a great conversation. You're very easy to talk to. You're charismatic. I appreciate the experiences that you've had in the gang life and the club life, in your personal life, and how articulate you are about them. Thank you for coming on. You want to let's talk about your book, The Ride of My Life. It's a good book. I've read it.
Yeah.
Did the kids respond to you well? That you're dealing with now?
Oh, absolutely, man. You know, I walk in there.
Your tattoos. You look like
I think when people think of therapist or social worker, you know, you walk in there and think there's some heavy set person in a tweed blazer, right? And I walk in there like, well, man, I'm not going to BS this guy. You know.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for being with us at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas and on Inside the Life.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it.
For behind-the-scenes photos, merchandise, and exclusive content, visit InsideTheLife.org. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get podcasts.